gentlemen, I have been given a very big task because my task is to write on the history of Sarawak. But I'm not a historian, I'm a lawyer by profession. So whatever I write here is basically what part of my research in the cases that I have been doing. So I wouldn't want to bore all of you because history is one of the most boring subjects in school. So in view of that, so I will try my best to make it as lively as possible. So I will not be talking as a history teacher. So I will be just summarizing as well as highlighting certain points which may be relevant to our purpose. So ladies and gentlemen, we start with the history of Sarawak proper on the 24th of September 1841. That was the time when James Brooke was appointed as the governor of Sarawak and officially recognized or given the title as Rajah of Sarawak. But at that time, when Sarawak was first born as a state, then it was comprising only of a very small territory, starting from the Cape of Tanjung Datu to Samarahan and the interior parts. Then in 1861, the area from Samarahan to Cape Kidurong that is in Bintulu was added to Sarawak. That's the second expansion, second territory added. And the third territory that was added to Sarawak was the grant of the Param district from Cape of Kidurong to Plai Bay. That is somewhere between Brunei and Miri. That was on the 13th of June, 1882. And the fourth area that was added to Sarawak was the district of Trusan, which was added on the 12th of December 1884. And finally, the last area, the last territory that was added to Sarawak was Limba, which is an area between Tempurung and the Plai district, if I'm not mistaken, the Brunei side. That was in 1890. But of course, in spite of these dates, there were a number of instruments called grants or a number of instruments that were either confirming or an agreement or affirmation of the granting of the territories, which is quite complicated, and these are legal documents. But anyway, these are the 5 territories that were incorporated into Sarawak through a process of time. Then from there, Sarawak began to what they call as a nation. Sarawak was existing as a nation until 1842 when the Japanese invaded. I think we all understand that, and it's on your t-shirts. And on the 18th of May 1946, then Sarawak was ceded to Great Britain as a crown colony. And during that time, there was some, I will go into a little bit of details after that. And eventually in 1963, then we get our independence on the 22nd of July. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the outline of history of Sarawak is in fact quite boring, and also it depends on how you look at it. But as a person who has been practicing law, and I do a lot of cases, I have to do a lot of research. And I begin to find a lot of details in the history of Sarawak which are very important to us, but have been overlooked or just ignored. Because if we understand history, then we understand ourselves, then we understand our rights, then we also understand where do we stand. So because of that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going back in history before Sarawak was first established on the 24th of September 1841. 24th of September 1841 was the date when Sarawak was first incepted, formed as a nation under James Cook. But now we want to know the time before that. This issue is very important because without knowing what happened before that, if we do not know, it will become a tragedy for us. The reason why this is important is because, taking for example, when the British, they went to Australia, they thought that they discovered Australia. So they discovered a new territory. They thought that there is nobody is occupying, there is no one occupying Australia. So they term Australia as a terra nullius, meaning a territory without occupation, without anybody, without inhabitants. So because of that, when we come back to Sarawak, in the case of Sarawak, many people, when they come back to Sarawak, they always think that the Australian concept, because when they talk about the land law in Sarawak, the same system of land law, which we call the Torrens system, applied in Australia and applied in New Zealand, was brought to Sarawak. And we brought back, when we imported the Torrens system into Sarawak, many people think that when we import this land law and apply it in Sarawak, they also think that because we have no proper written history, people think that the concept of terra nullius also applies in Sarawak, which is totally wrong. The thing is that, but of course eventually the Australian aborigines begin to fight back, and they slowly begins to recognize that Sarawak is, Australia is, after all, is not uninhabited territory, but a territory which has been occupied by the aborigines long time, many years before the European came. So now, with the change of approach and the change of perspective in Australia, now we have to come back to Sarawak and see for ourselves what is happening in Sarawak. Now, because of that, ladies and gentlemen, I propose to go back before 24th of September 1841. Now, what actually happened? Was Sarawak an occupied state, or was the territory, or were the territories from Tanjung Datu all the way to Lawas occupied? Yes. Then how do we look at them? Of course, obviously on records, we were under Brunei. But as you begin to find out, if you go and do much more research, in fact, what happened during the Brunei time was, the Brunei system of government was the appoint chiefs at the mouth of the rivers. And they are tax collectors. But in the rural areas, there is simply no government. Because if you read the history, I read a number of books. And in fact, a lot of the rural areas, especially in the interior, are occupied by natives, which are practically running their own government and having their own leaders and having their own laws, which are in the form of customs. Okay? That was the scenario, in fact, what was happening before 24th of September 1841. But of course the problem is, there has never been any official history written on this, the natives living in the interior. So whatever records do we have now are those records written by the officers of the Rajas as well as the colonial officers. So I believe in order for us to rediscover back, in order for us to attain the status of equality in a nation, it is very important for all the ethnic groups, or whatever you call them, they must have their own written history, obviously recognized, and to be part and incorporated as part of the history of Malaysia. This is very important to me. Because there is a saying which says, a people without history is a people without identity. And in fact, this is one of the biggest problems that we are facing in the courts. As a practicing lawyer, we always come to the court, they will ask, you will have to prove that you are a native. You will have to prove that your father is an Iban or a Bedayu, your mother must be an Iban or a Bedayu, and if you are not within this group interpreted as native, then you are not qualified to own native customary rights land. So that is why it is very important for us to have our identity based on history fully recorded and recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, the tribes that were recorded in the 1800s basically can be divided into the coastal areas as well as the interior areas. The coastal areas were mostly settled by the Malays, Melanos, and the Kadayans. The Malays are found along the coast of Sarawak. This is historical, not my record. So whether I'm right or wrong, this is based on the record. From Batang Lupar, Sadong, and Saribas. The Melanos are found along the Rejang River Delta, stretching up to Bintulu, while the Kadayans are along the coast of Miri to Lawas, that is also encompassing Brunei. While in the interior areas, in fact there are so many tribes, but the recorded ones are these: the Sea Dayaks, the Land Dayaks, Kayans, Kenya, and the smaller tribes, Unans, Lahanans, Bukitans, Lugats, Lisum, Liuns, Sangalang, Seru, and Ukits. And in fact, some of these tribes have now extinct, and they do no longer exist. The interior areas, these tribes as occupying are in the interior, the headwaters of the Sarawak River, the Sadong, the Rejang, Bale, Barang, the Kamena, Tatau, Limbang, and Lawas. So these are the areas. I am going to go a little bit because this will give us an idea of why or evidence of their existence. You see, these tribes exist. Normally they call them tribal nations because they exist on their own. They have their own governments, they have their own leadership, and they have their own laws. So we look at the Sea Dayaks. The Sea Dayaks are traditionally along the Batang Lupar, Serebas, Kelaka, and Rejang River. Gradually they move on to areas like Oya, Mukah, Tatau, Bintulu, Baramini, and Limbang. According to the historian, they were well known and feared for their hunting adventures, but at the same time they are considered as the most hospitable tribe in Sarawak. And how do they run their communities, or how do they administer their communities? They have the Tuai Serang, the Tuai Rumah, Orang Tau Tusuk, Lemambang, Tuai Burung, and Manang. These are the traditional leaders. In fact, positions like Pengulu, Temenggung, and Pemanca were created by the Raja group in order to manage the Iban community, because if they have to liaise or they have to get in touch with all the Tuai Rumah, it is totally impossible. So for the purpose of administration, the Raja group begin to bring in some changes, and there is some kind of evolution of customs. Instead of the traditional Iban leadership of the five-fold leadership, now we have added to this community. Added to the leadership are the Pengulu, Pemanca, and the Temenggung. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a little bit rusty because I have to catch my flight. So forgive me for that. So what I'll do is I will go straight to one area. This is I want to bring us to an area during the Rajah's era, which is very interesting. I mention this because it will reflect and it will give a picture to us how active were the communities or the societies or the tribes during the Rajah's time, from 1841 to 1946 or 1941. You see, the Rajah's time during the Rajah Brooke's era, it consisted of a period of 100 years. So according to Raja Charles Viner, he divided his stay or his administration or part of his life into 3 eras. 39 years divided into 3 parts. But basically what happened was that during the first Raja and the second Raja's time, the first part of the period was where they have to stabilize the government. This is where we can see, in fact, for the first time when James Brooke was declared as the Raja of Sarawak, the first rebellion that happened in 1841 was among the Land Dayaks, the Bidayu, in Singai, and they were led by two chiefs called Parimban and Patumo, and they were attacked and eventually they were defeated and executed. And the next, although in fact between this period there were a lot of suppression of the so-called piracy. That's why the Ibans are called Sidaya, because they used to go to the sea, although they are in the interior. So that's why the Europeans call them Sidayas, although they are living in the inland. So after the suppression of piracy in 1839, let me see. That is during the battle of Peting Maru, which is one of the biggest battle ever fought between the Raja and the so-called pirates. The pirates are a combination of the Sea Dayaks and the local Malays and Melanau leaders. And after that, then the next major insurrection against the government of Raja Brooke was the famous Rentap, who fought at least 4 wars between the Raja and Rentap. There were 4 wars. There were 4 battles fought during his time. That was from 1853 to 1861. Then after Rentap, another event happened. That was in 1857. This is what they call the Chinese Rebellion, where the Chinese from Sabah came down to Kuching and occupied captured the Kuching town. That was in 1857. Then the next major event during the Raja's time was the so-called Great Kayan Expedition in 1863. This expedition was carried out because the Kayans, at that time the Kayan tribes in Ulu Reja, refused to acknowledge the Raja's sovereignty or Raja's authority over them. So the Raja has to send in a force of around 12,000 forces to go and fight them, and eventually they were subdued. Then after the Great Kayan Expedition, then came an Iban leader called Pantin. Pantin was considered to be one of the most feared tribal leader at that time. From 1855 to 1932, when he finally surrendered and he left, he migrated to Indonesia. And the last One was in 1931. This is by Penghulu called Penghulu Asun. He's from Tabai in Kanawit. So basically, during the Raja's time, the interior areas were active with life. But if we look at history, we never know about the existence of these people. And we never know about the history of what happened, of how our people, the local people, carry out some form of struggle. Although they were called rebels at that time, in fact, many of them, like Asun and Pantin, they refused to pay tax. Meaning they refused to acknowledge authority. They were independent in their minds. As far as they're concerned, they are not obliged to anybody. Just like what one Kenyan chief in Tinjar in the 1800s says, I owe no allegiance to the Sultan of Brunei. I owe no allegiance to the Raja Brok, he said. Nobody can tell me to whom I owe my allegiance, he said. It is only me who decide whether I want to align myself to you or to another person. It's my right. You see, we have this kind of independence-minded people. People who want freedom, even though at that time, theoretically, or in terms legally, Tinjar was already ceded to, or Baram was already ceded to Raja Charles Brooke by the Sultan of Brunei. Now, after that, ladies and gentlemen, came the British colony. At the end of the World War II, came the British colony. There were few events which are quite interesting after that. In 1945, just about the end of World War II, there was a discussion between the Iban of Sarawak and Kalimantan to discuss a joint effort for independence under Pan-Dayakism. And second event was the Ibans of 1st and 2nd Division led by Philip Jitam and Idua Jerah opposing the secession. And the third one was by the Pergerakan Pemuda Melayu based in Cebu, also opposing secession of Sarawak to the British as a colony. It is very interesting if we look at the mentality or what happened during that time. This is when one of the Tuan Rumah was asked whether they like the Raja Brooke or the British colony. This is what he said. We don't know whether it was good or bad or good. Without any reflection, the idea is a good one. But if we consider it thoughtfully, it may not be. That was during the secession time. Now we got our independence on the 22nd of July, 1963. Then we were confronted with the formation of Malaysia. When Lord Cobble was interviewing the natives about their reactions, whether they want to join, they agree to the formation of Malaysia or not, there was a mixed reaction. I think we know the three, one third say yes, one third say yes with condition, one third say no. But very interesting, majority of the natives or the Sarawakians have this mentality. When this fellow was asked, this is what an Iban responded. Barang kunuan tuan. Whatever you say, sir, is reflecting a mentality I do not know. If you say it is good, then it is good. If you say it is bad, then it is bad. You see, we were put in a situation where we were totally incapable mentally to apprehend, understand what was given to us. So this is the mentality. And of course, like the keynote address by Datuk John Tanawi just now said, he mentioned about the census. Sarawak and Sabah was brought in to form a Malaysia to balance the racial composition. And until today, that power, even up to today, it is the power in Sabah and Sarawak that still uphold the federal power in Putrajaya. We still uphold the federal power in Putrajaya, depending on Sabah and Sarawak. Another very interesting state of mind which has been captured when after Malaysia was formed was this. When Tujuga was buffeted with the wheeling and dealings of politics in Malaysia, so he turned to one friend and he asked, "What is democracy?" he said. So the reply of his friends like this, "Apai, father," he said, "democracy means government of the people, for the people, by the people. But unfortunately, in our case, we seem to have rimau or tiger on the cruci or the chain." I don't know whether that's true, yes. Whether it's true nowadays. Yes. True. You see, the idea of democracy has not been grasped or understood by the people. So when the Global Commission came and asked them, definitely we can more or less tell whether they really understand or not. By this type of mentality, even a leader who was one of the pioneers in forming Malaysia, they came into a situation where they are not equipped to decide properly. And another interesting thing that happens after that, ladies and gentlemen, is this. During the times of politicking at that time, election or democracy was a very new experience to the natives. But by way of some, I don't know whether you call this evolution or not, but there is a change, there has been a change in the native communities, especially the native leaders. At that time, the native leaders no longer hold the office by popular advocates of their constituents, but in the place of the government. That was one of the important events that happens. That's why until today, many complaints with respect to a lot of our community leaders, they have been more or less become important, meaning they no longer have powers, the necessary powers to speak for their community and also to be accountable to the community who have appointed them. And the last point that I would like to highlight here, ladies and gentlemen, is with regards to the oil problem. This is oil in troubled waters, they call. You see, why 22nd of July is very important date for us? It's because of this. When the federal government was negotiating with the Sarawak government on the area where we can have our revenue, federal government's argument is that you can only have it up to maybe 3 miles from the shore. And beyond that is the continental shelf. Sarawak government's argument is that we should be entitled to the revenue until the continental shelf because that is part of the Sarawak landmass. But the federal government can cleverly say this is how the argument. Sarawak as Sarawak within the international community does not exist. They recognize only Malaysia, not Sarawak. Therefore, Sarawak has no local standard in the international community. Meaning, we only acquire the continental shelf, right to the continental shelf, after Malaysia was formed. But now, with us recognizing and acknowledging or that discovering that in fact we have been independent on the before Malaysia was formed. By all the more, much more important is that it shows that that argument is a fallacy. Because they said we only entitled to the continental shelf because we from Malaysia. But then Sarawak has been in existence before Malaysia was formed. That is why 22nd of July is a very important date, and in fact this will nullify the argument of the federal government as far as our rights to oil revenue within the continental shelf area.
Actually, they are trying to fool us because if you look at Article 3 of the Federal Constitution with regard to boundary, it says the boundary of the state is the boundary of the state before Malaysia Day. That's in the Constitution. The boundary of the state, say Sarawak, Sabah, is the boundary of the state when we become part of Malaysia, before we become part of Malaysia. Meaning, our boundary, Sabah and Sarawak especially, are at the continental shelf, which has been decided even in 1954. That is the established boundary, right up to the continental shelf. So we are entitled to collect royalty right up to the international shelf, and the land the land up to the boundary of the international state is our land, right? And therefore we have not yet charged Petronas of the rental of the land that they are using. I don't know if we should do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that ends my paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, YP Dato, and thank you very much, Mr.Paul Rajah, for the very interesting paper.